Hi, everyone, and welcome to GraphQL in 2016. It's really exciting to see so many people here, and yeah, we didn't think that when we organized this meetup just about 2 weeks ago. We also have a great lineup of speakers tonight, including people from Facebook, Joe Savona, and then we have the creator of Graphene, Syrus Akbary here. We have my colleague Sashko Stubailo, who's working on Apollo Stack, and we have Clay Alsop, who built GraphQL Hub. So my name is Jonas Helfer. I also work on Apollo Stack here at Meteor. And I'm going to give you a very quick intro into GraphQL for those who are not super familiar with it yet. I'm sure the other speakers will also give you things like that will help you understand GraphQL better. And then there's plenty of resources online that you can go to look it up. OK, so here's GraphQL in a nutshell. GraphQL is basically, why do I still hear the music, by the way? OK, yeah, never mind. Sorry. So GraphQL in a nutshell. GraphQL is a layer between your backends and your front end. So you can put that in, and it's a nice layer of abstraction that will help your front ends communicate with any backend. So that can be any kind of front end. It can be an iOS client. It can be Android. This can be React. It can be Angular, anything you want. And backends, it's the same. It can communicate with REST backends. It can communicate with SQL. It's all up to you to set it up. So GraphQL is really just the nice layer of abstraction in between that's kind of been missing from RESTful APIs. What's really nice with GraphQL is that clients can fetch all the data in just a single round trip. So they fetch all the data necessary for a view to be displayed in a single round trip. Now contrast that with REST endpoints, where you either split up your REST endpoint to have one endpoint for each model, and then you have to do multiple round trips to put together all your hierarchical data, or you make custom endpoints for just each view. In GraphQL, you don't need to do any of that. Different clients all use the same endpoint. They fetch all the data for one view in one round trip, usually. What's also nice about GraphQL is you will not have any overfetching and you will not have any underfetching. Clients specify exactly the data that they need, and the GraphQL server sends them that data in the shape they ask for, not more, not less. What that also means is that you don't have headaches with versioning of your API anymore. If you have iOS clients that, where people don't update their app for 4 years, but you still want them to be able to use your service, you don't have that headache with GraphQL because you can just add new fields, and those old clients can keep sending their queries, get exactly the data that they want, while new clients that support the new feature get the data that they want with the new features supported. A really nice thing about GraphQL is that it's strongly typed. So what that means is clients can ask, what does this server support? What is this field? What is this type? Is that an integer? Is that a string? How do these different types relate to each other? And with that, you can build amazing tools like Graphical, which is an in-browser IDE for exploring your API. You also get your documentation essentially built in. And my colleague Sashko Stubailo has actually made an ESLint plugin that will let you, as you type in your editor, will tell you when you're writing a query for GraphQL that contains a typo or that's asking for data that's not there. Now imagine if you could do that with your REST endpoints. If you could write a URL and your editor would tell you, oh, actually, you need to use a different argument here. With GraphQL, you have none of these problems. So just a very quick look. On the left here, we have a GraphQL query. As you can see, it's sort of like JSON. It's a hierarchical query. And here we're asking for a first name of an author and all the posts that this author has written, along with the title. And on the right side, we get the reply. And you'll see the shape of the reply is actually the same as the query, which is another really nice thing about GraphQL. Now, if you had another client that also wants the last name of the author, that would be easy to do, and you would just add that field. So here, sort of to emphasize the contrast with REST-like or RESTful, I don't want to get into an argument, what's proper REST, but usually REST APIs will kind of look the way you see on the left side, where you have different endpoints for different types of data, and they might talk to one or more databases in the backend. So how you wire that up is really up to you, and you put that into your REST endpoint. Now contrast that with GraphQL on the right side, where you really have one endpoint, and all clients talk to that one endpoint, and they send a single query, and then the GraphQL server figures out which backends to talk to get the data. And so GraphQL is really more of an idea. So GraphQL has a specification. It's not an implementation. It's not for a specific language, for a specific type of technology. It's really an idea. And there are many implementations in different languages. And it's really exciting to see how the GraphQL ecosystem is growing very quickly. So we have JavaScript implementations, Python, there's Ruby, there is implementations in Haskell, .NET, really a lot of them. And here I've just put a few of the logos. And actually for 4 of them, we'll have speakers tonight. So the first one is going to be Syrus Akbary for Graphene. Then after him, we'll have my colleague Sashko Stubailo for Apollo Stack. And then we have Joe Savona from Facebook, who will be talking about Relay. And last but not least, we have Clay Alsop, who will be talking about GraphQL Hub. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Syrus Akbary, the creator of Graphene, who will be talking about implementing how he implemented GraphQL in Python and what you can do with it.
That's it. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I'm Syrus Akbary. Today, I'm the creator of Graphene. Graphene is a framework for Python that let us create GraphQL schemas or operate with GraphQL in Python very easily. And today I'm going to talk about what is GraphQL. Jonas did a very great introduction, but I'm gonna do it too. Then we'll see a little bit about Graphene, but not too much. And then we'll research about what we can do to make GraphQL better as a community. So first slide. What is GraphQL? I want to ask you, how many of you already know what is GraphQL? Please raise your hands. Lee? Perfect. OK, so it's almost half and half. So I'm going to say almost the same thing as he did. So GraphQL is a query language created by Facebook that let us query exactly the data we want without underfetching or overfetching data. So if we expect to receive this data, this is how actually we have to query. So as he said, the GraphQL query just looks at the JSON, but without the values. And that's great. But what's the real thing? What we really love GraphQL? The main reason is because we swap the responsibility of querying from the server to a client. So if before we have all this data just in one RPC endpoint in our API, this logic were living in the server, and actually when we want to add a new client, like Android or whatever, we have to add this logic again into this RPC endpoint. But actually, it makes more sense to let the client the data it wants, and not the server. So let's go again to this example. So we want to fetch a user, me, and we want to fetch the fields name, company, and friends. And from friends, we want to fetch the name. So in GraphQL, we define the root query, which is the root type that we access when we query. And this root query type have the me field, which is returning a user type, which have name, company, and friends on it. And friends is just returning a list of users. So for example, if you're Python guys, this is how you have to implement it in Python. And actually, it's not very readable. It's not very easy to follow what's happening. So while I was deploying in Python, while I was trying to make GraphQL schemas in Python, I realized that I didn't like the way of writing GraphQL schemas. It was not natural for me. So why cannot make it simpler? That's the main reason I decided to create the framework, Graphene Python. As I told you before, Graphene Python is a framework for operating with GraphQL in Python very easily. So let's see an example and see how it works. So we define classes and types. We define GraphQL types on top of Python classes. Then we define the attributes that act as GraphQL fields. And we define what are these attributes. So for example, name is a string, company is a string, and friends is just a list of self which in this case is a list of users. And me is just referencing the user. And also, we move the resolvers to the class. So actually, it's much easier to see where our resolver belongs. So what are the main features of Graphene? We have integration with Django, SQL Alchemy, and as of 2 weeks ago, we also have Google App Engine support. And thanks to Eric Kamp, because he did a very great work on that. And also, we added 2 weeks ago middleware, which I'm going to research a little bit what is middleware actually in GraphQL. So also, I would like to give thanks to our community as today Graphene is the most started non-JavaScript GraphQL repository. So thank you, everyone. So next question, how we can take GraphQL to the next level? What we can do to make it better? So while I was working with Graphene in the backend and Relay in the frontend, I realized a lot of things that could make the effort of developing GraphQL schemas much easier. So one is live queries. If you see my presentation in the React.js conf, I was trying to accomplish this thing. But after researching a lot, I realized how hard it was to implement live queries without imposing how we have to handle that. I actually like the way Reactive-X is doing, but I just want to wait until Live Iron and probably Meteor finds a good solution for that. Next one, validation. What I mean with validation, if we actually already have validation in GraphQL, right? So imagine we want to create a user and we use the GraphQL mutation. A GraphQL mutation is just an action that we take in our data, in our GraphQL schema. So we want to create a user and we expect to receive age as an integer and we receive a string. Then GraphQL do a great job there and just like don't let us to run this query. Like it will stop the execution because the data, the query that we are doing is not valid. But what happens, for example, if we want to create a user and we expect to receive an email, but email, as all we know, email is a string, right? So in GraphQL, for handling this thing, we can either create a new type, an email type, which is kind of a string with validation, or we can add the validation in the resolver. But if we do that, what happens? The validation will be only available server-side, as it's living in where the resolver lives. So it's not very easy. It's not very easy now, sorry. It's not good because we cannot replicate easily in our client. And also, it will be validated, but not stopping the execution of the GraphQL query, which is bad. Actually, if we are running mutations, we want to stop if we are not doing a valid query, right? So what's the proposal here? One thing that we can do in GraphQL is just a new type into the schema, which is a validation type. Or we can also use directives. So another thing I would like to talk about is the planning phase. What I mean with planning phase? With planning phase, I mean that actually when we are querying any kind of data, when we are resolving a field, it could know what are the subfields that we are querying. And we are adding a phase between validation and resolving for fetching just the data we need. So for example, without planning phase, we will query in our database, like we will select everything. But if we have some kind of planning phase, we can know what fields we are requesting from our user and just query that from the database. So that's good. Actually, we can already do that in the resolvers, but it's not a very clean way. OK, one of the things I'm more proud of is middleware. But what I mean with middleware in GraphQL, in Express or Koa or any kind of Node.js framework, we have middleware. And what it means is we can modify the request at some point. But in GraphQL, we don't have any paths or whatever. So, but we can assimilate a URL, a URI, to a GraphQL field. So actually, what I mean with middleware in GraphQL is you can use it for affect the resolution of your fields at any time, at the beginning when you are resolving, in the middle, or after it's resolved. So this is actually already implemented in Graphene, but it's not just in Graphene. you can have middleware in GraphQL Ruby, and you can have middleware in Sangria. So you can see how 3 very different frameworks that are not implemented in the same way, we almost got to the same approach. So let's see an example on how it looks middleware in Graphene. So this is authorization middleware that will be called each time we resolve a field, and we'll check what is the return type for this field. And if the user in the context doesn't have permission for access this return type, then we will return none. So we don't need to add this logic into all our resolvers. And that's great. But other example, for example, we want to have rate limiting in our GraphQL schema. So for implementing, the only thing that we have to do is just create a counter in the context. And each time we are resolving, we increment the counter if we resolve it correctly. And if it reaches the limit, we will return none. For example, you can raise an error or whatever you want. And that's great. So in conclusion, we all love GraphQL. So let's make it better together. Thank you. Do you have any question?
Yeah, we have a couple minutes for questions. So if anybody has a question for Syrus.
No questions?
All right. If no one has a question, then I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
So what inspired you to? What was the sort of first inspiration for you to create Graphene?
Okay. The main inspiration was like, so I said, creating GraphQL schemas was not easy, neither in JavaScript or even Python. Like I was not feeling comfortable with it. So as I was not feeling comfortable, I just want to create a tool where I can write GraphQL schemas very easily. So for example, when I implemented Graphene, I started with the way I want to use it before implementing anything. And once I have the syntax, which is like the true value of Graphene, I can make any kind of implementation. So actually, we do 3 very big refactors, but as the syntax remains valid, we don't have to do any change on the Graphene implementations. So that was good. I like it.
Yeah, that's great. Any questions from the audience?
I will. So you mentioned the middleware. How do you actually go about using one of those middleware? So the rate limiting middleware, for instance.
Yes.
Does that end up getting implemented on all of your resolvers? Or do you how do you choose which?
It's implemented, actually, the middleware is called always, always, each time we call our resolver. So we don't, yeah, like it's, this way we can check either if the return type is the type that we expect, or if we want to add rate limiting, or if we want to add, for example, we have already middleware for debugging our Django queries. So actually in the Star Wars API example that we have in the Graphene, which is the URL here, if you go here and you see the Star Wars example, and you try the debug field in the root query, you will see what are all the SQL queries executed. And this is thanks for using middleware. So you have a lot of cool things thanks for using that. And as we are using promises, also in Python, it's very easy to, like the implementation of middleware was like 10 lines of code.
Do you see a lot of your users using middleware?
We just implemented 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Cool.
For those watching the live stream, the question was, how do you actually use middleware, and how do you decide where to apply it or where it doesn't apply? And we just heard the answer before.
Yeah. Other question?
All right, there's another question. Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest missing component from the GraphQL ecosystem right now?
Okay, so the question was, what do you think is the biggest component missing from the GraphQL ecosystem right now?
I really think validation should be something. I did a pull request and not a pull request, I opened an issue for discussion about that, and I think that could be really useful. Actually, I'm a little bit scared about directives because it opened this Pandora box where everything could be a directive, and I just want to make sure that we know what using a directive is. But for me, validation is something that is quite important. And it's important to stop the execution. So I think it should be the core.
All right, let's thank Syrus again for his talk.